this is a significant interest in the bank and therefore is excluded. Now, but what is following is actually more interesting, because the family member of an individual with 5% or more of the shares of a bank is also excluded from protection. Now, this is very strange, because the fact that I'm a family member of a person who holds significant interest does not mean that I have any economic relation to that person. Now, the definition of family member is actually quite astonishing. Now, family member is broadly defined in the law to mean a spouse, a child, parent, grandparent, parent's child, brother's child, sister's child, grandchild, parent's brother or sister, parent's brother's child, parent's sister's child. It goes on and on. Now, I think it is very interesting. Now, because you may be excluded from protection without you even knowing, because you have this long relationship. And I think that because of our customary relationships, I think some of these definitions can actually cause a lot of problems to proving who actually is a grandchild, a parent's brother's child. It's confused. I think this should be avoided. If you look at most jurisdictions, this is not included. And I think this is potentially this can lead to a lot of confusion. Can we go to the next slide? Now, accounts belonging to insiders, that's quite obvious. Insiders are excluded. Now, insiders include non-executive directors, executive directors, key management personnel of a bank are excluded from protection. The next one, accounts of persons with related interest in a bank. Now, related interest is defined in the Banking Act, the new Banking Act. It includes persons where, these are persons who have a firm or a company where an insider, a director, a shareholder, a key management personnel have significant interest. All these people are excluded from protection. Can we go to the next slide? Now, it includes holding companies of also companies where related persons have interest. Now, the accounts of audit firms, the audit partner, the audit manager who audited the bank 3 years before the bank went into liquidation are also excluded from protection. They should have known the bank was going, therefore they should have taken their money out. Let's go to the next slide, please. I don't know whether that's a good incentive or not, but that's what the law provides. Now, the accounts of pension funds and other institutional investors are excluded. I think it's quite easy to understand this. These are sophisticated investors. They know how to take care of themselves. In fact, the coverage limit of 6,250 Cs is not going to do anything to them, and they are not protected. Deposits held in foreign branches and subsidiaries of local banks are not protected. Foreign currency deposits are not protected. Now, I think this is the area of coverage is an important part, because I think that it is not clear in some of the areas what is covered and what is not covered. And I think that is where, if we are reviewing the law, we need to have a look. Now, let's look at some key challenges. These are matters that I have just a summary of matters that I think are shortfalls that we need to look at critically. The first one is the lack of independence. I think if you look at the whole structure of the scheme, there is a complete lack of independence of the scheme. Now, there is a real danger that the scheme will consider itself as a department of the Bank of Ghana. It shouldn't be. It should be independent. That is what the law intended. Now, the law doesn't say so specifically, but if you look at core principles of deposit insurance, it should be independent. Now, the independence of it is that it should have operational independence. Now, I think that having it structured as if it's a department of the Bank of Ghana is a significant shortcoming, simply because we have a deposit insurance scheme which is protecting depositors. Premiums are contributed by other banks, which premiums may be used to protect other failing banks. The scheme should have the independence to review where the membership of an entity is prejudicial to the scheme, and therefore decide that this company, this bank, should not be a member of this scheme, and we should withdraw the membership. And if that leads to that bank losing its license, that is a problem of the Bank of Ghana. I think the idea of a scheme which is almost looked at as a department of the Bank of Ghana, we need to take a second look at it, because it significantly undermines the efficiency and the effectiveness of the scheme. Can we go on? There's a note that I had. If you look at the Kenyan scheme, the independence of the scheme is specifically provided for in the law, that it is independent and it is not subject to interference from anybody. Now, the lack of examination powers. Now, I started by saying that we have a deposit scheme which is a pay box mandate. It is just simply supposed to pay. It doesn't have examination powers. Now, that I think is a significant shortfall in as well, because if you look at the law, under Section 64E of the law, one of the means by which the scheme may deny membership or may cause a membership of a bank or specialized deposit-taking institution to cease is where the scheme comes to the conclusion that that company, the affairs of the bank or specialized deposit-taking institution, is being conducted in a manner that is detrimental to the interests of that bank or specialized deposit-taking institution, or to the interests of depositors of that bank. Now, I think that is very, very important. If you have the power to make such a determination, then you should have the power to make the examination to reach that conclusion. Now, if you look at the law, under Section 38 of the law, the corporation has to rely on the examination of the Bank of Ghana to reach that conclusion. I think this is wrong. The examination should be done independently. It should have its own independent powers because it is protecting premiums contributed by other banks. It should therefore have its own independent examination powers to make this determination. Now, I have certain questions that is based on this. Now, why does the corporation need the approval of the Bank of Ghana before it reaches a conclusion that a member's affairs are not being conducted in a manner that is in the interest of the scheme or the bank itself? It should reach that conclusion independently. Now, the second one is that because the corporation doesn't have independent powers, how is it able to reach that conclusion that a membership of a bank should cease because that bank is conducting its business in a risky manner? The third one is that if you look at the scheme, the premium structure of the scheme is actually allowed, as I said, within 3 years' time, to start imposing risk-weighted premiums. Now, to impose risk-weighted premiums, you need to conduct independent examination of the banks to determine those premiums. Now, in this case as well, it has to rely on the Bank of Ghana. This is why my concern that this entity may see itself as an adjunct of the Bank of Ghana and a department of the Bank of Ghana. Now, there is no framework for the corporation to be involved in bank resolution mechanisms. Now, bank resolution mechanisms that are set out in the Banking Act, under our new Banking Act, there is significant scope. The Bank of Ghana has significant powers under sections 104 to 123 to save failing banks, to impose several measures on failing banks. But if you look at the law, there is no participation for the deposit insurance scheme. It is only notified when the Bank of Ghana has taken the decision. Now, what is interesting is that if you look at Section 38 of the law, it gives the corporation the power to, when it becomes aware that a company is going to go into resolution, to start negotiations with that company to determine what data is required, who are the depositors, who needs protection. Now, how is it going to know when it is only informed when a decision is taken? I think that even though it is not involved in bank supervision, I think the Bank of Ghana, the law should have allowed a situation where there's a minimum involvement for that entity to participate. Now, can we go to I think this is my last slide. Now, again, this is a point I have made. There's a complete lack of clarity in the scope of excluded deposits. And I think that these are the areas where the law needs to look at again in terms of improvement to make it a better functioning deposit insurance system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
The Deposit Protection Act seems to have been a very important legislation that has gone under the radar, and not many people have taken a look at it. I think when I was approached by Mr. Yate and his team from Graphic Business to start this, and I started looking at the law in detail, I realized that there was a missed opportunity for most of us who work in the financial services sector to not to have contributed when the law was being discussed in Parliament or sending memoranda. So there are various aspects of the law that we will look at today, which I think over time may have to be considered again. I think most of us here are aware of what deposit insurance is supposed to achieve. So I just want to go through a couple of introductory items and then talk about a few highlights of what the law covers. So the deposit insurance, I think as the governor said, it forms part of a pool of financial safety net mechanisms that is used in the financial system and by government to protect and strengthen the financial system. Now, safety net arrangements are broad, may cover where the central bank provides a lender of last resort provision for banks in trouble. We have sometimes explicit government guarantee of limited deposits. And also you may have strict prudential supervision as part of a safety net mechanism. Please proceed. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, deposit insurance may be explicit or implicit. I think you would have, an explicit insurance system is what we have now, where there's a statute that protects specified deposits in the banking system. Now, implicit insurance is where you have situations where the government is believed to provide protection. Now, you see, this brings a lot of pressure on government. Let's look at DKM, and sometimes actually has political connotations, and government is blamed when there is losses to depositors. So most people would prefer that we have an explicit insurance mechanism which provides transparency and provides, reduces pressure on government, and also provides certainty. Now, when you have a properly designed deposit insurance system, the whole idea is to prevent panic runs on banks and systemic contagion. Now, deposit insurance, however, I think you'll find it in the literature that there's a real danger that deposit insurance can lead to moral hazard in the sense that it increases risk-taking. People think that they are protected, and therefore nobody monitors banks in what banks do. But I think if you look at the details of our act, really it can't lead to moral hazard in the sense of encouraging bank risk-taking because of the fact that it is targeted at small depositors, doesn't really protect large deposits in banks, and therefore those people who have large stakes in banks are still motivated to monitor bank risk-taking. Now, a deposit insurance scheme really is not a panacea for financial stability in the system. I mean, you need to look at it in the context of a whole toolbox of various tools that are available to the central bank. I think the government mentioned various other options, various other mechanisms, prudential supervision, increased minimum capital requirements, proper corporate governance as some of the means to protect the financial system. Now, if you look at the literature, if you look at all that is written about deposit insurance, you realize that it needs to operate in a system where there's general macroeconomic stability, there's a resilient banking system, and a strong prudential supervision. There's a strong bank resolution framework for troubled banks. And then also that we have a strong accounting and disclosure framework. Now, without these mechanisms, it will fail. I think most people, when we hear about deposit insurance, think that it will solve every problem that we have in the banking system. I think it won't. If you look at even the anecdotal evidence in our economy, you realize that a lot of the danger to the financial system, that will lead to lack of confidence, has happened actually at the very lower end of the market, where people taking deposits who are not allowed to take deposits and leading to losses to the population. Can you go to the next slide? You have, I think the question, I think the governor mentioned the issue of, in the last week, there's been a lot of talk in the newspapers whether we need it or not. I think the evidence is overwhelming about whether we need it or not. I took this data from the International Association of Deposit Insurers. There are currently 126 deposit schemes across the world. There are, as of September 2017, 29 countries are looking at implementing deposit insurance schemes. All these people cannot be wrong. I think it is not that it solves all our problems, but also it is part of the tools in a developing economy to have in the financial system as part of the safety net arrangement. Can we go to the next slide? Now, I just want to touch on certain core deposit insurance principles that we need to take into account when we are reviewing what we have achieved with our Deposit Insurance Protection Act. Now, these principles I just took from the International Association of Deposit Insurers. I just selected a few core principles. Now, there is no one-size-fits-all in deposit insurance implementation, but we need to have certain key matters, and we'll try to look at these key matters when examining our own legislation. Now, the first one, we need to have a deposit insurance scheme that is operationally independent. Now, I think that's one point that we'll come to when we look at our law. It should be operationally independent. Now, the independence is very important because it needs to be protected from external interference. It needs to make its own assessment of premiums, its own assessment of what to protect, its own assessment of the examination of banks, for instance. Can we go on, please? Now, the governing boards of deposit insurance schemes should be devoid of conflicts of interest. There's a real danger that where you have people who have interest in the scheme being in control of the governing bodies, then it leads to significant conflicts of interest which can damage the independence of the scheme. Now, coverage of the scheme should be clearly defined. It should be ineligible deposits that are not protected should be clearly specified and easily determined. Now, there cannot be anything worse than improper communication of what deposit insurance achieves. And I think most people who hear about deposit insurance, I'm sure if my mother were to be listening to this, would think that any money that she puts in the bank will be protected. Now, that communication of deposit insurance protection should be very clear. Now, let's quickly go through what our Ghana Deposit Protection Act achieves. Now, this act came into force in October 11, 2017. Now, it sets up a DI scheme with a very narrow pay box mandate. A pay box mandate, that means that the scheme is actually only intended to pay out to insured depositors where an insured event occurs. It doesn't take part in any prudential risk minimization, and it doesn't take part in bank resolution functions. So it's a very limited pay box function. If you do a comparative study of other jurisdictions, in preparing this for this morning, I looked at Kenya, I looked at Nigeria, Tanzania. All of their schemes have what we call the pay box plus mandate, where the DI scheme has other functions and participates in bank examination and resolution functions as well. When bank resolution, I'm sure most of you would know, would mean the mechanisms for saving and restructuring failing banks. Now, our law, the membership of the scheme are limited to banks and deposit-taking institutions, non-bank deposit-taking institutions. Now, it is mandatory for these entities. Now, the objective is to protect small depositors, and I will talk about small depositors. Small depositors, you would know from the level of protection that is offered. It also is intended to support the development of a safe, sound, efficient, and stable market-based financial system. Next slide, please. Now, the premium for each member, there's an initial premium of 0.1% of the minimum capital of the entity. So 0.1% initial premium when it becomes operationalized. Now, there will be an annual premium which will range from 0.3% to 1.5% of average deposits insured by the scheme. Now, the corporation is also allowed within 3 years from its operationalization to start imposing risk-weighted premiums. So the corporation can review a bank's operations and decide that you need to pay a higher premium than other banks. Now, the insured coverage is as you would see, this is where the reality hits you. That it's quite limited. So for banks, it's 6,250 cedis. Nana mentioned that, and for specialized deposit-taking institutions, is 1,250 cedis. Now, the corporation is required by law to review the coverage 3 years from its implementation to determine whether the coverage limit is consistent with economic realities. So that it may be reviewed upwards or possibly downwards. Can we go to the next slide? Now, the deposits that are insurable, I think this is a very important part, and I think this is where we have a lot of confusion when I looked at it with our law. The law protects all deposits up to the limit that we have mentioned, but certain deposits are not covered. And I think what is not covered is not very clear. The first one is an account where the identity of the depositor cannot be identified. That is not covered. An account which is frozen by a court order is not covered. The next one is quite confusing and has potentially far-reaching implications. An account that belongs to a corporate person, a company or any other corporate body, or a member of a corporate person, if the corporate person or its member holds 25% or more of the shares of a bank. So if you take on its face, it looks clear, a corporate person or its member who holds 25% or more of the shares of a bank. Can you go to the next slide, please? Now, if you expand this limitation, what it means is that the bank accounts of a company which holds 25% or more of the shares of a bank it's excluded. The second expanded implication is that the bank accounts of a member of a corporate person, that means a shareholder, who holds 25% or more of the shares of a bank, are excluded. Now, the third one is that the bank accounts of a company whose member holds 25% or more of the shares of a bank is also excluded. Now, this is quite confusing, because so it means that if company A doesn't hold 25% of the shares of a bank, but a shareholder of company A holds 25% or more of the shares of a bank, the accounts of that shareholder and the company itself are excluded from protection. The family member of an individual with 5% or more of the shares of a bank is also excluded from protection. Now, this is very strange, because the fact that I'm a family member of a person who holds significant interest does not mean that I have any economic relation to that person. Now, the definition of family member is actually quite astonishing. Now, family member is broadly defined in the law to mean a spouse, a child, parent, grandparent, parent's child, brother's child, sister's child, grandchild, parent's brother or sister, parent's brother's child, parent's sister's child. It goes on and on. Now, I think it is very interesting. Now, because you may be excluded from protection without you even knowing, because you have this long relationship. And I think that because of our customary relationships, I think some of these definitions can actually cause a lot of problems to proving who actually is a grandchild, a parent's brother's child. It's confused. I think this should be avoided. If you look at most jurisdictions, this is not included. And I think this is potentially this can lead to a lot of confusion. Can we go to the next slide? Now, accounts belonging to insiders, that's quite obvious. Insiders are excluded. Now, insiders include non-executive directors, executive directors, key management personnel of a bank are excluded from protection. The next one, accounts of persons with related interest in a bank. Now, related interest is defined in the Banking Act, the new Banking Act. It includes persons where, these are persons who have a firm or a company where an insider, a director, a shareholder, a key management personnel have significant interest. All these people are excluded from protection. Can we go to the next slide? Now, it includes holding companies of also companies where related persons have interest. Now, the accounts of audit firms, the audit partner, the audit manager who audited the bank 3 years before the bank went into liquidation are also excluded from protection. They should have known the bank was going, therefore they should have taken their money out. Let's go to the next slide, please. I don't know whether that's a good incentive or not, but that's what the law provides. Now, the accounts of pension funds and other institutional investors are excluded. I think it's quite easy to understand this. These are sophisticated investors. They know how to take care of themselves. In fact, the coverage limit of 6,250 Cs is not going to do anything to them, and they are not protected. Deposits held in foreign branches and subsidiaries of local banks are not protected. Foreign currency deposits are not protected. Now, I think this is the area of coverage is an important part, because I think that it is not clear in some of the areas what is covered and what is not covered. I think that is where, if we are reviewing the law, we need to have a look. Now, let's look at some key challenges. These are matters that I have just, a summary of matters that I think are shortfalls that we need to look at critically. The first one is the lack of independence. I think if you look at the whole structure of the scheme, there is a complete lack of independence of the scheme. Now, there is a real danger that the scheme will consider itself as a department of the Bank of Ghana. It shouldn't be. It should be independent. That is what the law intended. Now, the law doesn't say so specifically, but if you look at core principles of deposit insurance, it should be independent. Now, the independence of it is that it should have operational independence. Now, I think that having it structured as if it's a department of the Bank of Ghana is a significant shortcoming, simply because we have a deposit insurance scheme which is protecting depositors. Premiums are contributed by other banks, which premiums may be used to protect other failing banks. The scheme should have the independence to review where the membership of an entity is prejudicial to the scheme, and therefore decide that this company, this bank, should not be a member of this scheme, and we should withdraw the membership. And if that leads to that bank losing its license, that is a problem of the Bank of Ghana. I think the idea of a scheme which is almost looked at as a department of the Bank of Ghana, we need to take a second look at it because it significantly undermines the efficiency and the effectiveness of the scheme. Can we go on? There's a note that I had. If you look at the Kenyan scheme, the independence of the scheme is specifically provided for in the law, that it is independent and it is not subject to interference from anybody. Now, the lack of examination powers. Now, I started by saying that we have a deposit scheme which is a pay box mandate. It is just simply supposed to pay. It doesn't have examination powers. Now, that I think is a significant shortfall as well, because if you look at the law, under Section 64E of the law, one of the means by which the scheme may deny membership or may cause a membership of a bank or specialized deposit-taking institution to cease is where the scheme comes to the conclusion that that company, the affairs of the bank or specialized deposit-taking institution, is being conducted in a manner that is detrimental to the interests of that bank or specialized deposit-taking institution, or to the interests of depositors of that bank. Now, I think that is very, very important. If you have the power to make such a determination, then you should have the power to make the examination to reach that conclusion. Now, if you look at the law, under Section 38 of the law, the corporation has to rely on the examination of the Bank of Ghana to reach that conclusion. I think this is wrong. The examination should be done independently. It should have its own independent powers because it is protecting premiums contributed by other banks. It should therefore have its own independent examination powers to make this determination. Now, I have certain questions that is based on this. Now, why does the corporation need the approval of the Bank of Ghana before it reaches a conclusion that a member's affairs are not being conducted in a manner that is in the interest of the scheme or the bank itself? It should reach that conclusion independently. Now, the second one is that because the corporation doesn't have independent powers, how is it able to reach that conclusion that a membership of a bank should cease because that bank is conducting its business in a risky manner? The third one is that if you look at the scheme, the premium structure of the scheme is actually allowed, as I said, within 3 years' time, to start imposing risk-weighted premiums. Now, to impose risk-weighted premiums, you need to conduct independent examination of the banks to determine those premiums. Now, in this case as well, it has to rely on the Bank of Ghana. This is why my concern that this entity may see itself as an adjunct of the Bank of Ghana and a department of the Bank of Ghana. Now, there is no framework for the corporation to be involved in bank resolution mechanisms. Now, bank resolution mechanisms that are set out in the Banking Act, under our new Banking Act, there is significant scope. The Bank of Ghana has significant powers under sections 104 to 123 to save failing banks, to impose several measures on failing banks. But if you look at the law, there is no participation for the deposit insurance scheme. It is only notified when the Bank of Ghana has taken the decision. Now, what is interesting is that if you look at Section 38 of the law, it gives the corporation the power to, when it becomes aware that a company is going to go into resolution, to start negotiations with that company to determine what data is required, who are the depositors, who needs protection. Now, how is it going to know when it is only informed when a decision is taken? I think that even though it is not involved in bank supervision, I think the Bank of Ghana, the law should have allowed a situation where there's a minimum involvement for that entity to participate.